Let me start by saying this. If you're here right now, you're part of a group that actually cares about what's really going on. Most people scroll past. You didn't. So go ahead and hit subscribe, turn on that bell, and let's make sure you stay informed every single day. Now, what I'm about to walk you through isn't some small political disagreement. This isn't about party lines or personal opinions. This is about a moment that happened live on camera where someone who's supposed to back the president no matter what couldn't. And that silence, it says more than any speech ever could. Let me set the scene for you. Sorry. Donald Trump recently stood in front of reporters and made a bold announcement. He said he's putting a 10% cap on credit card interest rates. He said companies that don't follow this rule will face, and I quote, very severe consequences. He said it with total confidence. He said it like it was already done, like it was already law, like Congress had already signed off. But here's the thing. None of that is true. There is no law, there is no vote, there is no legal power that lets a president do this on his own. There is no plan in Congress. There is no enforcement ready to go. It was just an announcement, just words. Now, I want to be clear about something. The frustration Trump is speaking to, that's real. Credit card interest rates are crushing families right now. Some people are paying close to 30% on their balances. That's not made up. That pain is real, but saying you'll fix it and actually fixing it are two very different things. And that's where Mike Johnson comes in. Mike Johnson is the Speaker of the House. He's one of the most powerful Republicans in the country. And for as long as he's held that position, he's been known for one thing, never, ever publicly questioning Donald Trump. His strategy has been simple. Stay quiet, stay loyal, nod along, don't make waves. But when reporters asked him about Trump's credit card interest rate cap, something changed. He didn't cheer. He didn't defend it. He didn't even repeat what Trump said. Instead, he froze. And then he started talking about process, about needing to study the issue, about working with experts, about possible unintended consequences, about how Congress would need to be involved. If you're keeping up so far, drop a comment and let me know. And if you haven't liked this video yet, go ahead and do that now. It helps more people see what's going on. So let me translate what Mike Johnson just said, because in politics, the words you choose matter. When the Speaker of the House responds to a president's announcement by talking about process and consequences and experts, he's not just being cautious, he's sending a message. He's saying as politely as possible that this idea hasn't been thought through. He's saying there's no real plan. He's saying Congress isn't on board. He's saying this isn't going to happen. And the fact that he said it publicly, where Trump and everyone else could hear it, that tells you something big is shifting behind the scenes. Because Mike Johnson didn't have to answer that way. He could have smiled and said, we support the president's goals, and moved on. He could have done what he always does, absorb the chaos and pretend everything's fine. But he didn't. He hesitated. And in a movement that's built on total loyalty, hesitation is a crack in the armor. This moment hits even harder when you look at the bigger picture. Just days before this, Trump was attacking the Federal Reserve. He was blaming Jerome Powell for inflation. He was defending tariffs that most economists say will make prices go up for regular Americans. And now, suddenly, he's positioning himself as the hero, fighting against big banks on behalf of working people. This is the same Donald Trump whose presidency was known for cutting regulations. The same Trump who rolled back protections for consumers. The same Trump who put industry insiders in charge of the agencies that are supposed to watch over them. The same Trump whose campaigns have been funded by Wall Street and billionaires. And now he's the consumer protection champion. The contradiction is so obvious that even his own allies can't ignore it. And that's what you saw in Mike Johnson's face. But here's the deeper issue. Mike Johnson's nervousness isn't really about policy. It's about money. See, even talking about cracking down on banks, even without any real plan behind it, makes donors nervous. Wall Street gives a lot of money to Republican campaigns. The financial industry has been one of the biggest sources of funding for the GOP for decades. And now Trump is on TV threatening banks with serious consequences for breaking a rule that doesn't even exist. That makes donors uncomfortable. That makes lobbyists uncomfortable. That makes the people who write the checks very, very uncomfortable. And when donors get nervous, Mike Johnson gets nervous. That's what you saw. Not rebellion, not some moral stand, just panic. The panic of someone caught between a president who says whatever comes to mind and an industry that expects stability. This reveals something that's been building for a long time inside the Republican Party. There's a gap, a growing gap, between Trump's off-the-cuff style and the reality of how government actually works. Trump governs by making announcements. Republican leadership governs by trying to manage the fallout. Trump says bold things that sound good at rallies. Leadership worries about donors, markets, and backlash. Trump wants applause today. Leadership wants to survive tomorrow. For years, Republican leaders tried to bridge that gap. They translated Trump's chaos into something that looked like a plan. They absorbed the shockwaves. They told everyone it was all under control. But that strategy is starting to fall apart because the stakes aren't abstract anymore. The economy isn't theoretical. Inflation isn't just a talking point. It's the price you see every time you go to the store. Debt isn't a number on a screen. It's a bill that shows up in your mailbox. And people feel it every single day. We're about halfway through this video. If this is making sense to you, if you're starting to see the bigger picture, share this with someone, send it to a friend who needs to understand what's happening, and make sure you're subscribed, because this story is far from over. Let me be direct about what Trump is doing here. This isn't policy. This is theater. He wants a villain that isn't him. He wants a headline that sounds like he's on your side. He wants applause without having to do the actual work. He wants to blame someone else while pretending to take action. And Republican leadership knows exactly what this is. But this kind of performance crosses a line. Because once you start publicly threatening banks, even if it's just talk, you open a door that's hard to close. Donors start asking questions. Lobbyists demand answers. Financial institutions want reassurance. Mike Johnson wasn't ready to open that door. So instead, he quietly tried to close it. And Democrats noticed. Elizabeth Warren, who has spent her entire career fighting for consumer protection, pointed out the obvious. If Trump actually cared about protecting people from predatory lending, he wouldn't be tearing down the agencies that do that work. He wouldn't be gutting oversight. He wouldn't be dismantling the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. He'd be doing the real work of governing. But he's not. Because this was never about helping people. This was about having something to say when people ask why everything costs more. And the more this gets talked about, the harder it becomes for Republicans to defend Trump without looking completely unserious. That's why Johnson hesitated instead of cheered. Because cheering would mean committing. Committing would mean writing a bill. Writing a bill would mean angering donors. So instead, he praised the idea in theory, questioned the method, and warned about consequences. And in doing that, he accidentally confirmed the main criticism of this entire presidency: impulse over planning, spectacle over structure, performance over preparation. What we're watching right now is the start of a new phase. Not resistance, not rebellion, containment. Republican leadership is trying to slow Trump down without directly challenging him. They're trying to turn his big declarations into something manageable. They're trying to keep things from falling apart while acting like everything's fine. But containment has limits. Because Trump doesn't slow down. He speeds up. When he senses hesitation, he doubles down. When he senses doubt, he attacks. And that's what makes this moment so risky for Republicans. Because once hesitation becomes visible, Trump's instinct isn't to adjust, it's to punish. But punishing Mike Johnson would only make the problem worse. Johnson isn't some random congressman. He's the Speaker of the House. He's the leader of the Republican majority. He's the face of the party in Congress. And if even he is choosing his words this carefully, it tells you how much pressure is building. This isn't the first time Johnson has had to do this. He's had to quietly distance himself from Trump's foreign policy comments, the remarks about expanding territory, the casual mentions of military action, the random thoughts that could cause international problems if anyone took them seriously. Each time, Johnson does the same thing. Careful denial, gentle reframing, quiet burial. He reassures everyone that no serious person is actually considering these things. But here's the problem. Donald Trump is the president. He is, by definition, a serious person. His words carry weight whether Mike Johnson wants them to or not. And that contradiction is becoming impossible to hide. What Johnson is really trying to say, without ever saying it directly, is that Trump's words don't automatically turn into action anymore. That used to be Trump's biggest strength, the idea that when he said something, it happened, that his confidence proved he could deliver. Now it's becoming his biggest weakness. Because once voters realize that many of Trump's promises aren't real, aren't enforceable, aren't backed by a plan, the whole thing loses its power. People don't just want anger. They want results. They don't just want someone to blame. They want solutions. They don't just want confidence. They want competence. And that's where Democrats are hitting hard. Not by attacking the idea of lowering interest rates. That's popular. They're attacking the emptiness of Trump's follow-through. Elizabeth Warren doesn't dismiss the concept. She highlights Trump's failure to actually do anything. She points out he's had years to push real consumer protection and chose deregulation instead. She notes that housing bills are stuck, that agencies are being gutted, that talk has replaced action. That's a smart move, because it shifts the debate away from ideology and toward competence. And competence is where Trump struggles most. Trump wants to talk about villains. Democrats want to talk about how things actually work. Trump wants to say he'll fix it. Democrats want to ask how. And when Republicans like Mike Johnson start quietly echoing that how question, even reluctantly, the whole dynamic changes. Because now it's not just Democrats versus Trump. It's reality versus performance. And that's a fight Trump has always lost, eventually. The economy doesn't care who you blame. Debt doesn't care who you insult. Interest rates don't drop because someone says they should. Markets don't respond to feelings. Banks don't change because of a speech. Institutions move when laws change. And laws require work. They require negotiation. They require compromise. They require the kind of detailed, unglamorous effort that Donald Trump has never been willing to do. Mike Johnson knows this. That's why he talked about process. That's why he warned about consequences. That's why he didn't applaud. And in politics, what you don't do is often just as important as what you do. Johnson's hesitation didn't stop Trump, but it did something just as powerful. It showed everyone watching, voters at home, donors on Wall Street, lobbyists tracking every word, that even Trump's defenders now understand there are limits, that there are boundaries he can't just talk his way past, that governing takes more than confidence, and once that realization sets in, it doesn't go away. Here's what makes this moment truly important. For almost 10 years, Trumpism has been built on one idea: confidence equals competence. If Trump says it with enough force, it must be true. If he announces it publicly, it must be happening. If he declares victory, the details don't matter. That formula worked when consequences felt far away. It doesn't work when people are drowning in debt. It doesn't work when groceries cost more every month. It doesn't work when rent keeps climbing. It doesn't work when credit card bills become impossible to manage, because economic reality is unforgiving. You can't declare interest rates lower. You can't threaten inflation into submission. You can't intimidate markets into doing what you want. And the people who understand that best aren't activists or TV commentators. They're institutional leaders like Mike Johnson. Leaders whose job is to prevent panic. Leaders whose job is to reassure donors. Leaders whose job is to keep the system stable. That's why Johnson's words were so careful. He wasn't trying to embarrass Trump. He wasn't trying to oppose him. He was trying to limit the damage. And damage control is a sign of fear. Fear that Trump's words are creating expectations Congress can't meet. Fear that donors will pull back. Fear that markets will react badly. Fear that voters will notice the gap between what's promised and what's delivered. This isn't the language of confidence. This is the language of crisis management. And the most revealing part? Johnson didn't flat out deny the policy, because denying it would require confrontation. Instead, he buried it under talk of process, studies, consensus, complexity, unintended consequences. That's how Washington kills ideas without saying no. And everyone watching understood exactly what was happening. And that moment broke the illusion, because Trump's brand depends on the idea that when he speaks, the party moves. When he announces something, institutions follow. When he decides, things happen. Johnson's hesitation said something else entirely. Not this time. Not automatically. Not without questions. And that sends shockwaves far beyond one press conference. It tells donors Congress isn't on board. It tells banks this is just talk, not regulation. It tells voters that promises might vanish when they hit reality. And once voters start to internalize that, Trump's greatest perceived strength, his decisiveness, becomes a problem. Because decisiveness without delivery is just recklessness. And recklessness isn't what people want when they're worried about paying their bills. This is why the Republican Party feels so tense right now. They're trapped between a leader who thrives on performance and voters who are demanding real results. Cultural outrage can dominate the news, but it can't lower interest rates. Blame can energize a crowd, but it can't stabilize prices. Confidence can win applause, but it can't replace policy. Mike Johnson knows this. That's why his instinct wasn't to cheer, but to warn. And that caution is spreading. You can see it in how Republican leaders talk about tariffs now. Less boldness, more defense. You can see it in how they talk about the Federal Reserve, careful not to fully back Trump's attacks. You can see it in how they talk about economic pain, vague concern, but no clear answers. This is what a party looks like when it knows it has a problem but doesn't know how to solve it. They can't directly confront Trump without risking backlash from his supporters. They can't fully embrace his ideas without risking disaster with donors and markets. So they hedge, they speak carefully, they praise goals while questioning methods, they nod along while quietly hoping nothing happens. And hedging isn't leadership. That's why this moment matters beyond just this one issue. It shows a party ruled by avoidance, a presidency ruled by impulse, and an economy that doesn't care about either. As Trump keeps making bold promises, the tension will only grow. Because every new promise creates another moment where someone like Mike Johnson has to translate fantasy into reality. And every time that happens, the illusion gets weaker. Voters aren't stupid. They can tell when something doesn't add up. They can tell when leaders talk in circles. They can tell when applause replaces action. And they're tired. Tired of being told help is coming without seeing it arrive. Tired of being blamed for systems they didn't build. Tired of watching politicians perform confidence while they live with uncertainty. This is why economic credibility matters more now than ever. And this is why moments like Johnson's pause carry so much weight. Because they show that even inside the most loyal political movements, reality eventually pushes through. Not loudly, not dramatically, but through pauses, through careful wording, through what gets said and what doesn't. That's how power shifts in Washington, not through explosions, but through erosion. Mike Johnson didn't rebel. But he revealed something far more damaging to a movement built on total loyalty. He revealed doubt. And once doubt enters the conversation, it doesn't disappear. It lingers, it spreads, it raises questions. If this idea isn't real, what else isn't? If this promise can't happen, which ones can? If leaders know something won't work but still support it in principle, who is this really for? Those questions don't need immediate answers to be powerful. They just need to be asked, and now they're being asked. This wasn't just an awkward moment. This wasn't just a policy disagreement. This wasn't just normal Washington politics. This was a signal that even Trump's most loyal defenders are starting to speak differently. A signal that confidence alone isn't enough anymore. A signal that the cracks inside the Republican Party aren't coming from outside critics anymore. They're forming quietly, slowly, steadily from within. Not through shouting. Not through defection. Not through dramatic confrontation. Through hesitation. Through caution. Through the gap between what Trump says and what his own party is willing to commit to. And in politics, that's often how the biggest changes start. Not with a bang, with a pause. If this video helped you understand what's actually happening, not just the headlines, not just the spin, but what's really going on behind the scenes, then do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel, hit that bell, share this video with someone who needs to see it. Leave a comment and tell me what you think happens next. Because this story isn't over. The fracture is just beginning. And I'll be here walking you through every step of it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.